Today I have the second part of my interview with Brad Hoff of Continental Baptist Missions. Welcome to Run with Horses. My name is Norman, and my goal is to help you thrive as a follower of Jesus. Following Jesus may lead you to some unlikely places and to do some things you weren't anticipating. That's my story and the story of many, like Brad, who take the first step of following Jesus and just keep going wherever he leads. We'll come back to that in a minute, but first, if you're listening to Run with Horses on Revelation Radio, you need to know that beginning November 4th, we have a new time and day along with some format changes. We go to the new 1-hour format on Saturday, November 4th at our new time, 6:30. So starting November, look for us at Revelation Radio every Saturday night at 6:30 for an hour-long show. For those of you who have been listening to Run with Horses on your favorite podcast player, new episodes will coincide with the radio broadcast and will be available every Saturday night beginning November 4th. Now, back to our regularly scheduled programming. We were talking before, and you got through Bible college and went to work in a church plant in Des Moines. But you said you weren't really feeling called toward church planting necessarily. So what was that turning point where you, or what did you do in between? I don't know. Did you do something else first?
No. We recently heard in the last couple of days, you and I heard a message where the speaker was referring to Paul's experiences in Acts chapter 16, the different places he attempted to go and God closed the doors. And one of the bits of advice that he gave as he referred to that text, he said, keep moving, After several years after graduation from Bible college, we're still in the area here. I'm working a job. Yeah, we're involved in the church, but I kind of felt like maybe we were falling into a rut that we might not get out of. So I thought, I need to be moving in some direction. And, what would I really like to do? Well, I'd really like to teach on a Bible college level, and that would require seminary. So we started making plans to go to a seminary. About that time, my wife was expecting our first child, and so kind of the plan was, okay, after the baby's born, then we can get really serious and start making some of these specific plans to move. But one of the things that was going to happen in between there was we had committed to go with the youth group in our church plant, and we were working as youth leaders at that point in the church plant. We had committed to go with our youth group to another church plant, another mission church in another state, to do vacation Bible school. It's going to be a missions trip for our kids. And so I was looking at it like we need to get this out of the way, so we can get on with these other plans. And we sat in that particular mission church, different setting. And I looked around that Sunday morning. We were going to have VBS then starting the following day. And I looked around at the people there, and I thought, I could be happy serving God in a place like this, in this kind of a ministry. And then it was, and then we, went into VBS and got to know not only the kids, but some of the teens and people in the church. And that pull just didn't go away, And so we came back from that trip a little bit conflicted, but still hadn't abandoned the plans to move, go to seminary. And a couple of weeks, like no more than 2 weeks after that missions trip, we got word. Let me add this: the missionary pastor at that mission church was a single guy. He was bivocational. He worked in the woods as a lumberjack during the week. He'd celebrated his 49th birthday while we were there, and he was, this guy was solid. He was, physically, he was really strong. So anyway, no more than 2 weeks after we got back from that trip, we got word that several other people had shown up for a prayer meeting, and their pastor didn't show up, so they went next door to their parsonage and found him dead in the parsonage of a heart attack. So now here's this mission church, this church plant without a missionary pastor, you know, and that was kind of added on to what was God was already doing in our lives. So that was a part of that process, just thinking very specifically the reality of here's a place of ministry where someone is needed, you know. And now we didn't end up going there, you know, but it was just the knowing that there's that represents, you know, kind of the needs.
A lot of places like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So then did you go on to seminary then?
Did not go on to seminary. Instead, we counseled with our pastor, and we began the application process then with Continental Baptist Missions.
Okay.
And so a year later, we went through the interview and candidate school process and then began our deputation work with CBM.
All right, what year was that?
We were accepted in 1985. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
All right.
yeah.
And so I guess I've talked to a few people, and just lightly mentioned maybe on the show before, but this process of deputation or pre-filled, a lot of places call it now.
Yeah.
How did you find that? I know some people really struggle with it.
Yeah.
For my wife and I, our focus was on ministering to churches, and it took us 4.5 years to get the support to go to Japan, but we felt like we could have done this for a long time.
Okay.
Because we were having good conversations with young people who were looking into ministry and answering questions. We were able to encourage pastors who maybe were isolated. We went to a lot of smaller churches.
Yeah.
We did that intentionally. We didn't really, personally, I think a church gets big enough that it's hard to be the church. It's hard to live out the one another's, and they're very, very intentional and really good at managing that.
Right.
The administration becomes very difficult.
Yeah.
So I've preferred smaller churches. So we did this for a long time and really enjoyed it. We never felt like, it's just such a drudgery. But I've talked to people even recently, it's so hard. And it's going on. And some of them, it's only been 2 years. It's like, you're just getting started.
Yeah.
But how did you find the process?
Yeah, well, there's definitely hard aspects of it, you know, of course. We wouldn't trade it for anything. It was another phase of the education process for us. You know, you're in that many different churches, and you learn, you know, from every one of them. You learn just kind of from the experience as a whole. You know, we have talked even fairly recently, my wife and I have talked fairly recently about some lessons we'd learned. You know, in a church where for a day of meeting, you know, we're there to present our ministry, and they plug you in a lot of places. You know, we were just really busy that day, you know, and left at the end of the day with a relatively small honoraria check, you know. And then we were in another church where we were there like only on a Sunday evening, you know, just that's all we had was part of the evening service, presented our ministry, and, you know, the church took a love offering, you know, and they sent us a check for $500 and something, you know. And so we learned through that, you know, that God really signs the checks. You know, he sends the support. He supplies our needs through this avenue and through that avenue, and you can't really make sense out of how much comes from whom, but you just look at it all as God provided, you know, and through each one of these, and you learn to be grateful, genuinely grateful for you know, for everyone, every church, every individual that the Lord uses. There were specific ministry challenges, you know, questions that you get asked. We were in a round robin missions conference. We're in a different church every night, and it's fun, and it can become, you know, it's kind of grueling as well. So we were. You know, we were coming to a specific church, having been in several of them, and you know, my wife had said something about, well, I hope the Lord gives us an easy one tonight. And we were staying with this couple. The wife was a fairly new believer, and her husband was not yet a believer. He actually wasn't off work at that point, but she had us for dinner, invited another lady from their church over, and treated us wonderfully. And we went to the church, presented our ministry. We came home, and she'd invited her neighbor, who lived in an apartment upstairs, and invited her neighbor to come down. And they started asking us all kinds of questions. Now, the neighbor professed to be a believer, but she knew she was not walking with the Lord and had excuses for that, that kind of thing. And we were up fairly late, I guess to tell the story, I have to back up a bit. For supper that evening, before the service, she had, among other things, there was sauerkraut, and neither my wife or I are big fans of sauerkraut. We didn't say anything. We just didn't, we didn't take any of the sauerkraut. We took the other things, and conversation is going on through the meal, and nobody says anything about that, So we think, okay, not a big deal, So several hours have gone by. It's after the service. We're talking with this lady, this fairly new believer, and with her friend who's, if she's a believer, she's a rebellious Christian, but still very much engaged in the conversation. And then this lady's unsaved husband comes in, got off work, he came in, greeted his wife, got introduced to us. The next thing he said to his wife was, "Did they take the sauerkraut?" And she said, "Nope, neither one of them touched it." So, busted, We thought we'd escape notice. But we had a really good conversation with him. We talked about that afterwards, and said that's not at all what we would have chosen. Someplace where after the service you go back home, you can go to your room and just go to sleep.
Recuperate.
Yeah, recuperate. And yet there was a lot of ministry that happened after that, after the service where we presented, and we were asked questions we'd not been asked, dealing with situations that we hadn't really thought about. Mm-hmm. And we looked at that and wow, what an education, So it's on the job training.
It is.
So we trust that the Lord used us in the lives of other people, but we know He used them in our lives for sure.
Right.
So yeah, it was. We saw the value of that. In addition, we weren't. I don't think we were focused on the financial support gained through it, mm-hmm. But really the education, the experience gained mm-hmm. was, yeah. We stayed in one home where, they had a couple of teenage children. We got to know them, and that was fun. And it continues to be a joy because one of those teenage kids in that home was your wife. That's how we met Susan.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. She was a high school student. We first met her, and then some years down the road, then we were able to host you and Susan in our home as you were on pre-field ministry. So.
Well, I know Susan has shared that having missionaries in their home is a big part of why when she was 13, she surrendered her life. Mm-hmm. So she didn't wait till she was as old as I was. Yeah. But she did early, but she had that example of having people in the home. So, that's it's an important part of preparation for missionaries, mm-hmm. I believe.
Yeah.
So then once you finished, then where did you go?
Our first ministry was a church plant in progress in the Upper Peninsula. We didn't start it. They'd had several CBM missionaries, Continental Baptist Missions missionaries. There was already good leadership mm-hmm. in the church body itself, and so that was yet that really was the next phase of education for us. I'm very thankful that we didn't step into a from-scratch church plant situation. 28 years old, we thought the experiences we'd had up to that point were ones that had prepared us well, but I'm thankful that our first ministry was not from scratch. We were at that ministry for about 6.5 years, and then as we felt our time there was coming to a close, we were challenged to consider planting a church in Sioux City, Iowa, and that was a from-scratch church plant, and I think that's possibly is that the first that you and I met?
I think so. I think you had a storefront.
We did,
building.
yeah.
I don't know, was that the first place that you had, or did you started somewhere?
Well, it started in our home. It's a Bible study with our family of 4, my wife and I and our 2 kids, and then 2 other adults in the city had learned that we were coming to plant a church, and so they were a part of that group. So it started as just a small group Bible study in our home. We met in a community center for a time, and then we located that storefront that you're referring to, and that was our meeting place for about 8 years until we were able to purchase property and build a building of our own.
Right.
So
we have another few minutes. I'm kind of curious. So I've been doing church planting in Japan, and I know there are similarities to doing it in the States, but a lot of differences. But as you have had the different experiences, both starting back even in just out of college, helping in one, what are the keys for a new church getting started that really help them to start well?
Well, again, it's a learning and growing process. When we were preparing to start that from scratch church plant, we said to people, we declared that we wanted this church plant to grow largely through evangelism and discipleship. That was our stated intention. Didn't necessarily know how to do that, frankly, my generation, we are very program centered. That's kind of how you do it. You start programs and try to get people to come to those programs. We didn't follow that model, though. That's, I have to acknowledge that's, my background in thinking, kind of thing. But starting as we did, there's no way we could start a bunch of, programs kind of thing. And what we discovered along the way was people that we met through whatever means that we met them. Every person that we met and that was interested in coming to our group, our studies, they had a network or a web of relations, their family members, their neighbors, their co-workers. And that's where we saw God bring fruit, was through that. Kind of the intentional disciple making was still taking shape in my mind. There's one experience that really stands out, to me. We'd had a young couple that were involved in significant ways in the ministry, and their job was going to be taking them out of the area, and we knew it was coming, and so we knew there's some holes we're going to have to fill, and who are we going to get to do that? So I started working down through the list, and it's a church plant. It's a very short list, right. Not a lot of people. But as I thought through the different ones in our little group, I thought, well, could this couple step in and take over those responsibilities? No, I don't think they're ready yet. Well, what about this couple? I don't think they're ready yet. And so I heard myself giving this answer, not yet, not yet. So I thought, okay, I say not yet, but specifically, what don't they have that they need to have in order to be able to serve in that way. And I really wasn't thinking in terms of specifics. It's just kind of this vague, I don't think they're ready yet. Okay, well, so specifically, what do they lack? And then the next question was even more convicting, and that was, what am I doing to provide that for them, to equip them with that? Right. Because I'm pretty sure Ephesians 4 says something about that being my responsibility, to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. So that's when we realized, okay, we need to be intentional. That means we need to know specifically, here are the things we need to build into people's lives. And then we need to kind of to be ministering in a way that's what we're doing, is equipping people for the work of the ministry. We had some help at that point, some things opportunity that came up that helped us think through how to do that. But I look back on that as that was really a key thing. And so this is a long way of coming around to answer your question, but we came to realize the ministry needs to be based on relationships, not programs.
Right.
We need to be, and a church plant can do that better, frankly, than a really big, really big church.
Yeah.
So.
Now I've heard that what we call a traditional church or legacy church, an existing church, it takes around close to 100 people, I think 90-something people, to see one person saved. So for every year, you have 90 people, you expect to see one person saved. If you have 200 people, maybe 2 people saved. But for a church plant, I want to say it was like 6 people for every 6 people in the church. Because a church plant is partly it's the intentionality.
Yeah.
And a church plant recognizes, hey, we better be reaching out or we got nothing.
Yeah.
And I think people get comfortable in a church they've been in for 20 years and they don't really think about their relationships anymore. Where the church is thinking, who do I know?
Yeah.
Who can I invite?
Yeah.
And I think that being intentional and then following that web of relationships is something that we should never get away from, but for some reason we do.
We do, yeah. As I think back on that, there was an intentionality. There was a desire on the part of the people that God brought to us, and some of them came to faith in Christ through the ministry of the church plant. Several had been saved through, prior to that, but kind of languishing, not growing. And but with both types of people, they were eager. They were talking to their family members. They were talking to their coworkers, their neighbors. And I don't recall that for any of us, none of it would have been financially driven, like, we got to reach more people, we can't pay the bills, but it was just, kind of the heartbeat, of that, during that phase of the church plant, the majority of the people that we had as part of our group, it was their first experience in a Bible-believing church of any kind, and it's a great thing to get to work with people like that. There's some challenges that come with that, and there's work, but there's a vitality there that's fresh and
Right.
Yeah.
So one question that I think a lot of listeners would be curious about, that goes along with a lot of things I talk about regularly. So you have these new people coming in the church and they don't have a church background, but maybe they get saved and they see a need to grow. So how did you, whether you personally or you as a church, how did you set them up to grow? How did you help them develop new habits, and or what did you tell those new believers to help them make those first steps?
Yeah, well, that's also another example of having to learn and grow. I put together a series of very simple little Bible studies. We would call them discipleship studies. Thinking, okay, here are the things that this person needs to have, as a new believer. And so we'd walk them through, initially it was like 8 studies we go through. And then, of course, you think, oh, yeah, we need to add this. And because they need to know, this. You realize you need to keep adding. And then also realizing, too, that filling in the blanks on a little Bible study leaflet, going through the study, etc. They've done the study, but it doesn't mean they've built the habit into their life, So we learned, life on life it's a key, to that. And we worked with people we were attempting to work with them in intentional disciple-making small groups, where they would build relationships with each other, and then addressing the specific things in the Christian life. My thinking, prior to that and kind of going into that was that with a new Christian, after they profess faith in Christ, there are these things they need to learn, these 6 or 8 basic things they need to learn. And once you walk them through that, then you can pronounce them to have been discipled, and now they're normal Christians, And we realized, no, discipleship isn't something that gets done in 8 weeks. Mm-hmm. It's a lifetime.
I think that's something a lot of churches make that mistake, where we have an 8-week or 12-week discipleship course, mm-hmm. and that's what we do for discipleship. Mm-hmm. It's like, what about the rest of their life?
Yeah. We, coming to understand it's a lifelong, it's a lifelong thing, because there's always more we need to learn, and then there's some things when I say learn, I don't mean just information that we gain.
But learn to apply.
Yeah, learn to apply. Things we've learned to apply, and yet the application sometimes falls off, or needs to be adjusted and fixed in some way, and that's true for me,
you never get away from needing other believers, and that's part of where the family comes back in, the accountability and walking together. We don't ever leave that. Even as, a missionary or a pastor who's been a pastor for a long time, you still need that other pastors, other people who are mature who you can walk with. So you need to keep in mind. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
I look forward to talking to you again down the road, maybe more about disciple making and discipleship and some of those lessons that you learned. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Norman. It's been great to have this talk with you.